I was making 30K like in 2014, and I made 500K in 2019, so 5 years.
That's Zach Wilson, a data engineer who has worked for Facebook, Netflix, and Airbnb. And like you heard, more than 15x'd his salary to over $500,000 in less than 5 years.
If I save the company 10 times my salary, right, then I deserve 10%.
In this episode, you'll learn what it takes to have a successful data career.
I think that that's one of the key things to my success, and I still do this even today, is I need a...
You'll hear Zach's magical transformation from drug user to million-dollar data engineer.
I knew that there was a moment that would change my life forever.
And of course, you'll learn what you need to know to go from data analyst to data engineer.
I think other things that you really need to know are gonna be you need to know
So stay tuned to hear the full story and advice from the million-dollar data engineer, Zach Wilson. Zach, you've worked for Facebook, you've worked for Netflix, you've worked for Airbnb. You've made a crap ton of money at all those different places, over $500,000. But you kind of started your career as a data analyst making like $30,000-ish a year.
Yep, for sure. It was actually here. We're in Utah right now, and it was kind of down the street from where we're filming this is where I started my career, is doing Tableau and all that stuff. Yeah, for sure.
So that's pretty crazy that you could go from 30,000 to 500,000 in, that was probably what, 7-ish years?
So I was making $30. I was making 30K in 2014, and I made 500K in 2019, so 5 years. Yeah.
In 5 years.
Yeah. It was essentially, it was close to a doubling every year. That was roughly what it was.
So I think a lot of people who watch the show are getting into data, and they'd like to do something, even remotely similar. What do you in those 5 years, what do you chalk up how you were able to do that?
I think there's a couple things there. Part of it is that I just didn't live a very balanced life. I think that and because I think one of the things that is important to remember when you see outsized success is what was the price they paid for that, right? What was the sacrifice they made for that, right? And definitely from 18, when I was 18 till I was 24 or 25, I stayed inside coding on the weekends. I had startups, right? I had a startup for Magic the Gathering that I did that it was an app that got to 50,000 users, right? I had another startup for art management that I did on the weekends that we got to over 500 artists who were all using it to manage their art and professional lives. And then I had a third startup that was for Call of Duty Warzone, where we tracked the stats of different players and how they play well together. And so part of it is that I just eat, sleep, breathe code, right? That's a part of it. And I think that that's where a lot of people for me, it's I am okay with coding 7 days a week. Right. I mean, not 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, because I think that is unhealthy. But I do think that putting a little bit in each day, I think that that's one of the key things to my success. And I still do this even today, is I need to write one line of code every day. And it's it's one of those things that's similar to I have a couple of these. Is I need to do one push-up every day, and I need to write one line of code every day. Because one of the things about that commitment is it seems so small, right? It's okay, and sometimes it is. Sometimes it really honestly is, because I'm sick, or I have no energy, and it's okay, yeah, I am literally gonna go and update the README, and that counts. It counts because I did a commit, right? And it counts. But generally speaking, when I write one line of code, that overcomes the inertia of getting into the creative process. And then you can, one line maybe turns into 100 or 200, and then I'm okay, cool, I have a cool feature here I can now ship. So I think that's one part of it. There's always multitudes of parts of things. I think that is a big part of it, is just having that just determination to be successful. That was a big part of it. I think another part of it is finding the right people, though. Finding the right people in your life. Because when I got in at Facebook, right? So that first that was my first big tech company, and they were paying me $180. So really, most of the growth I saw was actually after I got into big tech, because it was going from 180 to 500. And I didn't expect that. That was actually something I did not anticipate, because when I lived out here in Utah, when I was making the 30K, when I was having a vision for where I was at 35, right? I was like, you know, I visioned myself making like 200 at 35. And that was something, because I was like, that sounded reasonable. That sounded like I'm going to be so rich. It's going to be so great, right? And I think one of the things that happened for me, though, is I met one person. And one person can change your life, right? And so that person was my manager at Facebook. And his name was Jitender. And Jitender and I worked together for 4 years. Like, so for 2 years at Facebook and 2 years at Netflix, he was my manager. Same guy for 4 years. And like, one of the things that this guy did was he was very different from other managers. A lot of managers are they're risk averse, because they're like, we're only gonna give you projects that we know you are 100% capable of doing, right? Because they don't want a project to fail. But the problem with that is, if you have a manager like that, like, that's not a good manager to have. Because the main reason that's not a good manager to have is that manager is not going to support your growth. That manager is like, we want you to do what you're capable of right now and nothing more, right? And this is where Jitender had like the opposite. Like, he was essentially like, we're going to put you in the biggest possible growth zone that you can be in. And I mean, it was good and bad, though. I mean, I think that both sides of that were like, so at Facebook, it was great because he put me in this great growth zone. I got promoted in 6 months, right? And then I was on track to getting promoted again to senior in a year after that. But then he left. And then I got a new manager, and that manager was not down to promote me. And then that's when I was like, okay, bye. And then I just left Facebook because I felt like I was deserving of that promotion. And then I went to Netflix and got the promotion. And I just worked with him again because I was like, I want to work with managers who believe in me. But like what I said before, though, is that like, I think one of the things that happened and why I ended up leaving Netflix, and I actually had this kind of crazy burnout at Netflix, was that management is complicated. And like, you also do, like, you know, you can't put people in positions where like they need to grow too much, otherwise they're gonna fail. Like, it's just the nature of the beast, where it's like, if I was like, hey, Avery, go run against Usain Bolt in the Olympics tomorrow. I'm like, you got 1 day to train. Like, you're probably not gonna make it, right? But I mean, if you have 10 years to train, like, you'll probably put up some good numbers, but like, you need some time, right? You need some time to cook, right?
For sure.
And so I think for me, when I was at Netflix, here was the problem at Netflix, right? So I was dying to be senior, and I got the senior role at Netflix. The problem that happened, and why I think I burnt out and why I quit, was after being at Netflix for 9 months, the staff engineer on my team, he changed teams, and then there was an open role. And I was like, hey, Jitender, I want that role. And so the thing was like, my senior engineer career was 9 months long.
Oh,
and then I got immediately put into freaking like essentially like a staff role where I had way more architecture decisions and like way more teams to interface with. Because I went from like working in like kind of more of a data engineering role where I talked with like 1 or 2 teams, like the infrastructure team and the A/B testing team. That's what I was doing before I got into the staff role. And then when I got into the staff role, it was like, okay, now you're talking to 12 cybersecurity teams, right? And like, you're working on a project that everyone is relying on you to deliver on. And so I think for me, the growth of those soft skills. So soft skills is like, because I had the technical skills because I had been growing those on the weekends, every weekend for like years. So like, from a technical perspective, I was ready for the staff role. From like a soft skill perspective, I was not ready at all. And that's why like ultimately I think what ended up happening was instead of like having hard conversations, instead of pushing back on timelines, I kind of was like, I'm going to solve this with code. I'm just going to deliver a good project. And as long as if I code more, I will be more successful. Which is wrong. The answer is like, you want to delegate, you want to communicate, you also want to say no, right? You don't want to burn out, right? I mean, I look back on that situation as like, I learned a lot, but then ultimately I was like, I can't do this job anymore. I can't do this. It's too crazy. It's too much for me. And then I left, right? And I actually had like kind of this like soul-shattering experience where I quit my job, and then the pandemic happened, and then I got really depressed, right? And then there was like 9 months there where I was like doing nothing. I essentially was like, I tried to be like a professional video game player, right? It was insane. And then near the end of 2020 was when I like started making content. That's when I applied to Airbnb. Well, applied to a bunch of jobs, Airbnb, Facebook, Google. I did a ton of interviews before I got in at Airbnb. And then, then Airbnb, like when I got the role at Airbnb, I got the staff role, and I was nervous actually, because I was like, if this is the same as what I had before, dude, I am not going to do well. Yeah. But I've learned, like I learned a lot. I learned all the hard lessons. So like at Airbnb, it was way better. It was way better because I was able to like lean a lot more into that communication and delegation. The skills that I did not have at Netflix that crushed me, right? And I was able to develop those skills and have a way better work-life balance.
That's really important. Like work-life balance is something that I think you've come to value over time. And I know it's something I've come to value over time as well. One of the things you mentioned, you're talking about how you were only, at, one company for maybe 2 years, maybe the other company for 2 years. So you've done a lot of job hopping.
100%.
Which a lot of people that I talk to are pretty nervous. They're like, well, I don't want to leave a job after being there for only a short period of time. Do you regret any of your job hops, or are you glad that you did them?
Great question. That's a great question. So before I got into big tech, it was actually really bad. Like that analyst role, the one that I started on, I was there for 9 months. And then my next role was a data engineering role. I was there for 6 months. And then I got into a software engineering role, but I was there for 6 months. And so the first 2 years of my career, I had 4 roles. And so those I actually do not regret. I do not regret any of those because of the fact that I was hungry. And honestly, there is a perspective here that like 2015, 2016, and now in terms of like job market and interest rates and a lot of things, there's like other factors you want to be considering, because back then their jobs would just fall into everyone's lap. Like it was easier for sure. But like I also found out like those first 4 I think it was actually critical for me to get that job at Facebook, because otherwise if I would have just stayed in one role, I wouldn't have gotten that growth I needed to get into big tech. That being said, like I feel like when I got in at Facebook, and that jump from Facebook to Netflix in particular, that one I've looked back on a couple different times in my life and with different kind of views, because when I look at the 3 big tech companies and like where I felt the most like at home and the most like involved and a part of it, right? And not as isolated, was definitely at Facebook. At Facebook, I felt like I was part of like a family and a team, and it felt very good. It was like I look at 2017. It's funny when I talk to my therapist about this, I'm always like, look at 2017 in particular as the year when like I was like the most like healthy. Like I had like the best like mental health. I had a lot of good connections at work. I felt very powerful, right? And like I feel like even now I'm still trying to like find those pieces that I had like 7 years ago. And like one of the things I realized when I was making that hop was like I got like kind of very money focused and very like focused on like, okay, like it's very important that I make as much money as possible right now, right? And that's not always the way to be thinking about things. Like you also want to be thinking about like, where can I work and learn and grow in a sustainable way over a long period of time, right? And honestly, for me, like looking back on it, like with a more like mature lens, because I did quit my job at Facebook when I was 23 years old, and I was a young buck, and it was a different time. But like looking back on that, I think that like that job hop like could have been different, because there are some people, it's funny because like there's some people who are on my team there who didn't hop, right? And now they've been at Facebook for like almost 10 years. And like I see their lives and I'm like, wow, you guys have I feel like my life is more complicated. I don't know, but overall, I besides that one hop, I actually feel like hopping is generally good.
I think so too, and I think that's one of the things that's allowed you. Like I think you make more money from hopping than you do at staying a lot of companies. Like
definitely.
Like for some reason someone else is more incentivized to give you more money than your current company, which seems messed up, but it's
similar. It's similar to startups though, right? So
Sure.
Startups are actually, it's a very strange thing. So startups that make no money actually raise more funds than startups that have revenue. Right? Like, especially if we're talking in that early seed stage, right? Because if you're pre-revenue and you're selling an idea of like, this could be amazing, versus like the thing that's different is like when you have money, then there's data to look at, right? And there's data of like, well, I see a trajectory here and now I can plot it and I have a better idea of what the value here is. but that's where there's like a bias, and the same thing happens when you're an employee, right? Is like, because if you are interviewing, right, you're selling them on like your potential of like what you could do for them, what could be awesome, right? But then once you're stuck in the system and you have like a year of impact, which might possibly, some of that could be like not your full potential, but that's because of the company is just bad at making you productive, because companies have stupid processes and all sorts of, they have hard teammates to work with. There's so many reasons why like the potential that you sell the company on versus like what is actually delivered can be different. And but like I also think that companies, like their promotion processes and like their raise processes are very rigid, right? They're like, a lot of times like companies are like, okay, you got to be here for 2 years before we promote you. And it's like, no, no, that's not how it works. I mean, I guess like for me, the thing I think about is like, if I make, the way I look at it is like, if I save the company 10 times my salary, right? Then I deserve 10%. I deserve 10% of the money I save a company, right? Sure. And it's like, okay, if I'm saving the company $2 million, I deserve 200K. For sure. And it's like, even if I've been there for 6 months, it doesn't matter. It's about impact, right? And like, I think more companies are starting to notice that, and that like, that's actually the way to go. Is if you want to keep your high performers around, those people are very good. And that's like, if you let them just go to a company that's going to pay them more, like your business will suffer.
Will lose money.
For sure.
And you had that, if I'm not mistaken, with Robinhood and DoorDash, right? They were like, you're kind of job hoppy. We don't know if you're going to stay.
And Databricks, dude. The Databricks in particular was the one that broke my heart a little bit. Like, cause like I did the whole loop with them. And then at the end, and I was like, dude, like you could have told me this like in the first interview, but like we have 10 hours of interviews, but okay, whatever. And but at the end of it, he's like, yeah, I just don't think that you're gonna stick around, right? That there's companies that like, and this is important. I think a caveat with job hopping is as you become more of a leader, there is an expectation that you stay longer. And it makes sense, like, because like if you have a leader that leaves, it's very disruptive to the whole org or whoever they're leading. Those 5, 10, 20 engineers that are under them, like they're gonna be like lost for 3 to 6 months, and that can be very like it has like almost like it's like, because as a leader, right, you have leveraged impact, but you can also have leveraged impact in the other direction, right? You can impact the company. Your departure is gonna it's not just your impact that's leaving, it's also gonna impact the morale of everyone who's under you. And so for sure, and that's one of the things I think that like if I ever did go back I would like into like industry or whatever, I would want to find a role that I would be down with staying for like 3 or 4 years. I would want, like, part of me feels like it's so weird because I get all these stock grants and they're always over 4 years. And I'm like, okay, I'll do 2 years and I'm just going to throw away the other half. I'm like, I don't care. Like, whatever. Those stocks are not meant to be. Like,
that happens from time to time. I'm curious with what you just said, like with all those different options that you've had in your career, and going from a quote unquote data analyst or some sort of role where you're doing data analytics to doing full stack development and then specializing in data engineering specifically. Yep. What does the path, in your opinion, look like from going from a data analyst to a data engineer?
Ooh, that's such a good one. Like I feel lucky for me. Like I think one of the things about like the analyst role that I picked, like, so I think that's one nuance and caveat I want to talk about real quick, is that like when I graduated, right, I graduated with a computer science degree. It was a computer science and applied math dual major. It was a bachelor's degree. And when I was interviewing, I actually had 2 offers. One was to go do like full stack development for like the U.S. military. That was like, and it was like in Davis County, Hill Air Force Base, right?
It's the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Not my favorite place.
And then the other one was to go work as an analyst in Draper. And
Draper's nice.
Yeah, Draper's great. And but the military role actually paid over double. It was so it was like $65K. And but the one but because it was an engineering role instead of an analyst role, so you get that bump there. But like also like, but for me, I picked the analyst role for a couple of reasons. Like, one, it was at a startup, right? 2, everyone at the startup except for me, right, had a PhD in math, machine learning, or statistics. I would be the only one at the company who didn't have a PhD. And I was like, whoa, I feel like that's crazy. I was like, that is like a crazy environment that I want to put myself into, because I know that if I do that, I will just soak up all that knowledge and learning, right? So, and I think that like that's an important caveat, but like when I've thought about like that transition from data, like data analyst to data engineer, I think that there's a couple things, because I did that transition after that, like, because honestly, my computer science degree did not help that much with like data engineering, because it's like it wasn't taught at all, right? So besides like one SQL class, but that's already something analysts know. So like I think other things that you really need to know are going to be like, you need to know like Linux and Unix, like you need to know how to use the command line. Right? That's a very important thing. Like know how to like just do all the things, copy files, make directories, maybe even use Vim a little bit, like and a thing called SSH where you can like use the terminal of another computer. And there's all sorts of things like that I think are super important that like are in some ways they're becoming less important in data engineering over time because of like platforms like Databricks and Snowflake, and they're just making everything's just like the easy button now, right? Yeah. So it's like part of it is like I think the transition is actually getting easier over time, which is great. I actually think that's a great thing, because it means that analytics in companies is just going to be less bottlenecked. But other things, right? You need to know about distributed compute, right? Because if you've been working, most analysts, they work with SQL and they might work with Postgres or SQL Server or like, I don't know, Vertica or something like that. And like learning about like distributed compute with things like Spark or BigQuery or Snowflake, and understanding how SKU works and like how to manage all that stuff. That's another big thing, because then you can run queries on terabytes and terabytes of data, and it will come back. Like it will actually come back. It might take an hour, but it will actually come back, right? And you'll actually get a result back. And so I think that's another one. And then Python. Python's the other big one. You got to really, really hone in on that Python skill, because that's how you build your pipelines. Python essentially builds all your pipelines nowadays. And so I'd say those are the main things that you got to really focus on.
I like that. And I mean, it's not too many things. I mean, it's easier said than done. That's for sure. But if you do those things as an analyst, you're developing your toolbox to where you can be less restricted in what you're doing, and also probably make more money, because data engineers on average make more money than data analysts. And those are just hard skills to learn, and they're in demand skills.
And I honestly think that there is a third role here that is emerging that I really love, is analytics engineer. It's actually like the halfway point
50-50,
right?
Yeah.
Where you're like an analyst and a data engineer, where you don't have to know all of just the crazy technicals of data engineering, but like, you know, enough to build a pipeline, you know, enough to generate data. And so you can unblock yourself, right, for most pipelines. And then like there's only the crazy, scary technical ones you pass to a data engineer. And then like, I mean, I've had just so many great partnerships with analytics engineers, both at Netflix and Airbnb, where like essentially like I will go and work on just that master data layer. And then all of like the metrics and visualization and experiments and everything, that all gets handled by the analytics engineer. And they just work with tables. They don't have to work with like APIs or extracting anything. It's just like, here's a good table, now make aggregates on top of it, and you know, fancy charts. And that role is really emerging, because I think one of the things that people are realizing is that like most companies don't need like a data engineer like me who can process data of any size, because it just they don't
like
have
Netflix,
it, right? They don't have a petabyte of data, right? It's like they might have like 1 terabyte of data, and they're like, this is really big and annoying, right? And so like and because that's like what and I think that role didn't exist because we felt like you had to be in one of those two buckets, either data engineer or data analyst. And then it's similar with, there's another role in between data analyst and data scientist as well, right? And I think these new roles are very awesome because they're great, because there's the product analyst. If you're like product analyst, that one's like where it's a data analyst who knows experimentation, product analytics, all the kind of like statistical stuff that you need for like A/B testing, but they don't necessarily know all like the deep inner workings of like ML and XGBoost and all that, like, you know, data sciencey stuff, because they don't really need to use that, because that stuff's again like used for 5% or less of like actual business problems. But I think those two roles are roles to be looking out for: analytics engineer and product analyst. Those two roles are going to be much bigger in the coming years as well.
I agree, and I think it's hard to keep track of all the titles. Like the analytics engineer is like one that's, I feel like, really emerged in the last 5 years. One of the things I like, and I'm big on data career titles because they're so weird and they're hard to like actually know what they do. Because like analytics engineer versus like data analyst versus data engineer, like you can make an argument those all kind of sound the same, right?
Yeah.
To just like untrained ears. But one of the frameworks I actually really like is your builder to investigator continuum, where like you want to explain that? You have a full stack developer kind of in the builder phase.
Yeah, so like essentially all of these roles are broken down between it's on 2 dimensions here, like where you have like what % of the time are they building versus what % of the time are they like digging into the data. Where you have like a software engineer, like a full stack software engineer is going to be almost exclusively building, and so they're going to be like 100%. And then data engineer is going to be one below that, where they're going to be spending probably like 75% of their time building, 25% of their time digging into the data, like checking out like what is this dirty, is this weird, like I need to like figure this out. Then you have like analytics engineer, which is like right in the middle. Analytics engineer is going to be like 50-50 between building and digging in. And then you have below that, you have the that's where you have like data scientist or product analyst is going to be that kind of like where they have like 75% of the time they're investigating and digging in, and then 25% of the time they're doing like, you know, they're setting up experiments or they're building dashboards or stuff like that, right? And then data analyst they're not like usually 100% investigating, but they are like a large percentage, like 80 to 90% investigating, and then 10%, you know, building dashboards, building Excel sheets, whatever, all the different like views and pivot tables and all the things that analysts do.
I like that continuum because I think it's like really hard to know. And I mean, like, of course, there's going to be certain roles where it's labeled a data analyst and maybe they're building, 40% of the time. Like these are just like.
Yeah, it's rough. It's like bell curves, right? It's like, this is like the median, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's useful to like try to figure out what you do in different roles.
Yeah, and knowing what you're good at, right? And I think that's one of the things I recognized when after doing Tableau for like, about 9 months in my first role I was like, I want to build more. I loved building Tableau dashboards because like you could just create something so cool so quickly, right? It's like, especially after you like master it, right? It's like Tableau is a crazy tool, right? It gets a bad rap, I feel like, sometimes from like people who like code, because they're like, why would you use Tableau when you can just use ggplot, or you can just use like, or like for me D3, and I'm like, dude, yeah, but like, do you know how long it takes you to build that viz in D3? Like it's gonna
so hard.
Like in Tableau it's like connect and then you drop 2 pills and then you're done, whereas with D3 it's gonna take you 10 times or 20 times as long, right?
So hard.
And like D3 is crazy. Like I did a lot of D3 work at Netflix, and I'm like I recognize that like almost all visual, the only time that you actually want to use D3, I've learned what the line is for when you need a chart type that doesn't exist in Tableau. Right, like my favorite example that I did at Netflix was the network chart type, where you have all the nodes and how they're all connected, and it
that
like,
is a good
it's
one.
a very like, and it's like animated and it like dances around and stuff. Like, and when I built that, I felt very like, I was like, yeah, that's right. Like I'm like, this is take that Tableau. It's like, even though this was slow, you can't even do it in Tableau.
Even though it's slow.
Yes.
I love that. All right, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was. Do you think that someone with like a non-technical degree, like let's just say maybe like a high school teacher, could become a data engineer straight from a high school teacher to a data engineer? I
mean, I would say that like it's an interesting one. I think that it's going to be more challenging. I think that it's possible. I definitely think it's possible, and I know that there are, like, for example, I have this friend Ken who I worked with at Facebook. He's still at Facebook actually, doing great, and he. His background's in like psychology. Like he has got his bachelor's in psychology, and then he just taught himself how to code, and then he got in at Facebook. So it's like if someone like him can do that, right? And he can get in at Facebook and also keep growing. It's like I think one of the things that I think is like tricky with these kind of questions is like, it's not really about what your background is. It's more about like what you like, because it's like if it is something that you like and like you have your brain is wired to do those things. Because I definitely feel like there are people out there who are like very extroverted and very people oriented who they could do data engineering, but they would be miserable, right? And it's like that's not what they would want to do, right? And like, I think that one of the things that like we need to do in our society is kind of shift things a little bit, and because I honestly believe like excluding a couple roles like doctor and lawyer and like there's a couple roles out there that like really do require just an insanely ridiculous amount of education. But if you exclude those roles, I firmly believe that pretty much, if you look at like 90% of the roles in society, it's like everyone can mostly do those roles. Like there is some things around like capability, right? Where it's like, are you an analytically minded person? If the answer to that question is no, then don't be a data engineer. You'll hate it. It's not going to be for you, right? But then it's like, and then it comes back to like, okay, for like a high school teacher, right? If you love teaching, a lot of times those people, like if they're down to like deal with, hundreds of high schoolers every day, like those people are probably at least a little bit people oriented, right? So that's where if that was one of their strengths, I would probably guide them towards a tech role that was a little bit more people focused. Because I think data engineer specifically is going to be one that is less people focused. So like I think for someone like that, like something like data scientist, data analyst, or like product manager, like one of those roles is probably going to be better. But then again, it depends, right? It depends on like, was this like a high school math teacher? Was this a high school like programming teacher? Or or are they like an art teacher? Right? I think those things matter. But like, I think that like the main thing I'm trying to say here is that like, it really doesn't matter. Like your background doesn't matter. Like, cause like, I mean, if there's people who don't have the computer science degree, they don't have the technical background from like school, and then they're getting in at Facebook where like Facebook accepts they accept 0.2% of people who apply. 0.2%, right? And there are people, so it's like, if it was a hard requirement, that a computer science degree was a hard requirement, then there wouldn't be people like him. There wouldn't be those people, like I wouldn't have worked with those people, right? Those people would not be there. And so like it shows that like it's more than just like your degree or like where you came from. There's like other things that also are a part of this that like matter a lot. And I think like that part of it is really important because I think a lot of people let their background like determine their fate, right? And it's one of those things that like I really caution people about because it's like you can always reinvent yourself. You can always change your mind, right? And that is like it's a beautiful thing about life, right? Is that for sure.
That's actually what I want to talk about is your background. So this is for those who don't know, Zach is, he was making $500,000 at these, big tech companies. If you look at it from like an objective perspective, and I hope you don't take offense at this. You kind of like, your background would be like, you have no business doing that almost.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? Like you were a smart kid growing up, but got into drugs super early. Mm-hmm. In your life. You went to, and I mean this with the most respect. Yeah. You went to Weber State. Yep. Not a top tier university in Utah.
Not even
top 5. I don't think.
Yeah, not even top 5.
Might be 5th.
Yeah, for sure. 5th or 6th. Probably,
yeah. You have ADHD. Mm-hmm. You kind of had no business ending up where you did.
Yeah, totally agree.
But I like that what you just said is so many people get hooked up on like what their background is and what society says that they should become. Yeah. Oh, I forgot to mention, I'm from Utah. Yeah. Zach was born here. You're from a place in Utah. I don't know where it is. Yeah. I had never really heard of it. Yeah, 100%. It's like Clinton or something.
Yeah, Clinton, right? Yeah.
I know every city in Utah. I feel like I have no idea.
It's a really small town.
I know it's north of here, but that's it. It's like you have no business with becoming who you did, but you didn't let your background slow you down because of that.
Yeah, I mean, well, there was a moment for me. There was a moment where like I knew that there was a moment that like would change my life forever. Like it was crazy. Like this was at the beginning of 2016. When I was really struggling with drugs and like because I had graduated and I figured everything out, and then I was like working at about that first data engineering role, and then I was like, I want something different. I want something better. I want something new. I'm stuck here, right? And that's when I was like, you know what? I'm just going to move. I'm just going to try it out. I'm going to leave Utah. I'm going to try something out and go somewhere different and be brave, right? And because like, I think this is another thing I had learned. And this is like a thing that I realized that it's kind of a part about life that is scary, I think in some regards as well, is that like, I know that leaving Utah was a critical part of my success because one of the things that was happening here was a lot of the connections I had made here were actually holding me back. They were actually being there because they saw me as like a source of hope, a source of like excitement and inspiration. But the thing was they were also there being like, yeah, but like, let's also just drink every weekend. Let's all just get high every weekend. Or even sometimes on a Tuesday. And it's like, okay, dude, like what's going on? Like, it was like really taking back from like my creative output and like my health as well. Right. I decided to I was like, I'm done. I'm done messing up my life. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go to the other side of the country. I moved to Washington, D.C. and it was hard. It was very, very hard, especially those first couple months because I was just so used to having like all these friends around and all these people and all these parties. And then it went from that to like nobody, right? And it was like, okay, go start over. You have no friends, like, nobody here. And it was good though. It was good because one of the things that allowed for like the first time in my life was to have that my own voice really kind of bubble up to the surface. Because one of the things that's kind of weird about Utah in particular was like, I always felt like I was kind of stuck in between. Utah has like this thing where they kind of make you choose, where it's like you either are gonna like be a part of the church and be a good kid, or you're gonna be a rebel and you're gonna like just kind of go in that boat. And I felt like that was it. It was like now looking back on it, I know it's a false dichotomy and then there are like kind of gradients that you can pick in the middle as well. But like, at least when I was like a teenager, I honestly believed that you either had to be a Mormon or an anti-Mormon, right? And like, you had to be on the other side. And like, I felt like one of the things that I loved about like leaving here was all of that went away. All of those pressures just evaporated. And then it was just like, what do I want? What do I want as a person? And like, that's what it allowed me to like finally listen to myself. And that's like where, that's also when I was like started being even more productive, when I really started hitting a lot of the like side projects and coding projects and just like, really getting into it because I didn't have the distractions as well, because I was like, I'm not doing drugs now. I don't have friends to party with. Like, I have my Xbox and my freaking laptop here, and I can either play video games or I can code, right? And I kind of forced myself to do that, and that like changed me. And then it was crazy because it was like after like 6-7 months of being sober, that's when I got the job at Facebook. It was then. It was really crazy. It kind of manifested that way, where it was like, once you kind of find your space, you can do that. And I think that there's a couple things though that I think are also important here to just remember about stuff, is that like this stuff, like your story does impact you, right? It has impacts in certain different ways. I mean, I know I'm still impacted by a lot of this stuff, but like you can, like, if there's something that you really, really want, right? Whatever it is, like if you show up and pay the price, you'll get it. The universe is very fair. It's something in some ways. It's like, at least in terms of like, if you want something that is like within reason, right? And you are like willing to spend, the way I look at it is like, if you're willing to spend 2 to 3 hours a day, every day, on something that you want, you'll get there. You'll get there. Like, because guess what? Most people don't do that.
Yeah.
Most people most people can't find 30 minutes a day to exercise, right? Even though that is something that's shown that like if you exercise for 30 minutes every day, like you are going to live 7 to 10 years longer, right? There's like hard data on that. And that's, again, most people can't even do that, right? So it's like, if you just being consistent, that consistency of just like showing up, just being like, I'm gonna be here every day. I'm gonna do it even when I'm sad, even when I'm tired, even when I'm like, because it's like, because if you do that, the other thing about it is like, and you kind of rely on discipline more than motivation. Because I used to rely on motivation. And what happens when I rely on motivation is like, I get these freaking high peaks of productivity, and then I have weeks of nothing, right? Because it'll be like, it's like, oh, well, I'm not happy right now. I'm just not in the mood to code, right? And it's like, but if you let like your emotional state determine what you do, you don't have that much control over your life, right? And you're not going to be able to mold it in the way that you want to. And I think I'd say that's like when it all boils down to like how I got to where I was, even though like I was the only one at Facebook from Weber State. Like, it was just me, right? And like, yeah, like all those things. And I was like, I feel like that was the main learning that I kind of stumbled into. I stumbled into back like in 2016, where I was like, well, this is good.
I love it, because I think my takeaway, and hopefully for everyone watching takeaway, is, even if you're in a situation where like you're a stay-at-home mom who hasn't been in the workplace, maybe you got some like degree that's like you feel like it's basket weaving and completely useless, or like you struggle with mental health stuff. If the consistency can take you from where you're at to where you want to go.
Yeah, and even in a short amount of time. Like, it's not something that we're saying like, okay, you have to like go and grind data analytics like 3 hours a day every day for 4 years or something like that. It's not like it's one of those things where like, it's like, my perspective on it is like these timelines, like if you are that consistent, the timeline is at the longest a year. Like, it's really like if you were doing it like, but obviously I think some people like that maintaining that consistency is what's tricky, and then that's what can extend timelines and make things like take a little bit longer. But like, generally speaking, like I know for me, like I did from another perspective, was like after I created content on LinkedIn every day for a year, I knew that was going to be my new life. Even though I wasn't making money yet, I knew that was my new life at that point after doing it for a year, because I was like, now I've been doing it for almost 4 years. And like, it's crazy to think about. And like that consistency is, there's something about, especially like that year mark, because it's like, it's where like you are officially like, I always think about it as like you're now officially invested in this thing for more than 1% of your life. And that's kind of like that's where the universe is like, okay, this is your thing now. This is like, and then like doors open up and like opportunities come to you at that point. That's why I think that's why like, I think that's one of the reasons why like college is so like, like looked at very well, because they're like, oh, it's not even 1%, you're like 3 or 4% of your life now. And it's like, yeah, but like, I don't know, like it's kind of spread out more, right? It's not as focused. And that's the thing I like about like these like boot camps and starter programs, is it's like, it's a way to get to where you want to go quickly, like as quick as possible, right? You're like, I'm not trying to teach you anything that is not necessary.
Yeah.
Right?
You don't have to take the boring classes.
There's no gen ed classes here, right?
I love that. Yeah, that's sweet. And that's actually a good plug. If you guys are watching this, you've probably seen Zach's social channels, but if not, we'll have him in the show notes down below. Go check him out. Check out his boot camp. You have a cohort you just finished, or
January is gonna be the next one. Yeah, we finished one in June, and I'm spending the next couple of months to like really like refine the platform and refine the curricula and get it like really just perfect. And it's gonna be great. I know the cohort in January is gonna be really amazing.
Sweet. Well, thanks, Zach, for coming on.
Yeah, for sure. I love being here.
Appreciate it.